Hello, I'm David. I'm the product manager of the SMEMA Hermes Adaptor. I'm also a member of the Hermes committee. I felt compelled to try to bring you up to date with how we are getting on with the different versions of Hermes Standard. I've been asked at a number of trade shows and via emails of how things are getting on. And if you check the website at recording of this video, the latest news article was from 2019, so the impression might be given that little has been done. But if you also check the documentation element of our website, you would notice that the latest at the moment is 1.6, 1.7 is due, so good progression has been made. So this was just a kind of me relaying what I know about progression and maybe what might occur in the future. So first of all, I want to start off with my personal interest in this standard. We were forming a business around 2016, and the Hermes Standard I think came along 6 months later or a year later, and so did the CFX. We were in a market discovery phase. We were interested in supporting the industry, and so all these new data standards that appeared we were interested in, but we were coming from it from a people sense. We were questioning whether to participate in this industry. Having previous knowledge of it, I knew the weaknesses of it, and I kind of concluded that generational change would occur, and it was a question of when it would occur. So these are a few bullet points of our interest. First of all, transparency. So in order for us to understand how the industry is moving forward, we need to be self-motivated in promoting what we do. And so I was questioning how the silos that are currently existing within our industry, that being between regional silos, partners between customers and suppliers, technology silos, were going to kind of improve and get removed. So when looking at the Hermes Standard, all these new data standards that were appearing, I was going to see if the software community was going to remove those silos, because we are a sociable bunch. We like to collaborate. We like to collaborate via work, via actual output, rather than maybe talking and socializing in a traditional sense. But we like to make things, and we like to support others, and that's exactly the sort of company that I wanted to found, which is a company that was supporting the industry rather than disrupting it. What I've kind of realized is by encouraging change, you are a disruptor in a sense. So transparency. So can the industry, without prompt, promote itself and take people along with the progression? So without having a marketing team encouraging you to do so, is the industry going to say what's happening, have opinion, project themselves, be proud of what you do? And to me, that's a benefit for everyone in the industry, not only the industry as a whole, but companies. If you can get your employees to promote what they do, participate in connections via LinkedIn, for example, or promote yourself via blogs, videos, be part of podcasts. These are all things that have gradually over the last decade have been a thing and have improved. Organic collaboration is the next point. So again, without direction, without being told to do so, can we, by the transparency of the industry, can we start to say, we have that problem, we had that problem, we've done this thing, we're now going to show and tell it to the industry, and other people can come along and go, yeah, we have the same problem, we would love to take that solution. Now, taking actually is, even though it seems a bit one way, it helps the industry because it becomes an artificial standard. But ultimately, thinking about from a software sense, it's also about collaborating. It's about improving that solution. So it's about having people that can, without fear of competition or without worrying about who you're working with, simply have an end goal of improving the industry as a whole, rather than being worried about competitions or being put into a silo where you simply don't know what's already out there. And that can be beneficial for your career. If your manager tells you to do something and you don't know what already is out there in the world, then you will reinvent the wheel. Third point is the more obvious point: technology. New data standards means other people can be part of the solution. As I've spoken to already, the industry is very siloed, so you do get collaboration, but it's not organic, and that's the key point here. It's very much when the customer and the supplier are working together, or maybe the customer has two suppliers, they want a solution, and they kind of glue them together. What I want to see is organic collaboration. So without direction, can the industry work together indirectly on solutions? So again, it's this concept of maybe putting some software onto GitHub, saying this is our problem, this is how we solved it, and someone else coming along going, yeah, that's a great way of, we had the same problem and we love that solution, we're going to help you develop it. So while these standards like the Hermes Standard is a branding exercise, and it's about pulling people together, I want to know at what point will this industry collaborate on an organic scale. And finally, with all that transparency, with all that collaboration, with all the new technologies around, what can we do as a small new business? Again, I wanted to start this business as a supportive business. And as I've already said, sometimes the status quo, the ways of the business world in our industry at the moment, it means that sometimes you have to get within the club, you have to be a partner, and that just creates silos and reinvention of the wheel, etc. So that's from my interest. So when I was part of the Hermes Standard, or when I continue to be part of the Hermes Standard membership, what I'm questioning is the transparency of it. Are we being open to the rest of the industry about it? Do we have people within the membership, people outside the membership, working together with common themes and goals? Because I can tell you, as a supplier of customers, a lot of my customers have the same problems. So why reinvent the wheel? And let's start collaborating. So the question is, what can we do? Now, going back to the time we joined the standard, we didn't join at the start because we were not an equipment supplier. So what we were simply planning to do was to digest the data that was going to potentially move between machines or move upwards using the CFX. That was our initial kind of point. So what we question is, how can we help the standard progress? And then we developed our adapter between SMEMA and Hermes because we saw that as an obvious a deployment barrier for customers that don't want to bin their equipment just because the interface isn't the latest and greatest. So we created this adapter. When we created the adapter, we were welcomed into the Hermes Standard. So the scope, I'm going to talk about the scope later on a little bit more, but generally the scope, if you, without it being detailed in front of you, is to replace SMEMA, which has dedicated wiring, to an IP-based solution. The solution they proposed is peer-to-peer, so machine-to-machine, which is very much very much like the SMEMA setup as it is today. A cable runs from machine to machine. Now, of course, because it's IP based, the likelihood is you're not running an Ethernet cable from machine to machine, you're running it via switch. So that can create a little bit of confusion, but the architecture is machine to machine. They chose XML to wrap up the data, and they chose to send that data down raw network sockets. And ultimately, what it provided beyond the SMEMA capabilities is the opportunity to send IDs about the product that was moving between the machines. So simple attributes such as length and width of the product, but also things like work IDs, product IDs, and then we progressed this recently to have actions and directions. So we can say to the machine it needs to go down, because it's this type of product, it needs to go down this part of the production line, or maybe it doesn't need to be processed by the next machine. So we can have an element of control. So I conducted a peer review in 2019. If you haven't seen that, I would recommend going and watching that after this video. I'm not going to go into what I've thought then. That was kind of early days of my first impression of the standard. It coupled the network connection of the network socket with the actual standard of the data itself, and I said that that was a poor architectural design, because essentially the network connection should be maintained by a subsystem that maintains that connection, and if it disconnects, it reconnects that system, and then the messaging should then go over that, on top of that. So if a message gets sent and the connection has failed, it should be queued, or there should be a way of signaling to the messenger that the connection has failed, please wait, or whatever, or resend, or there should be timeouts and things like that. They use XML, which is a flavor of the early 2000s, flavor of the day of the early 2000s. Most data-centric users now use JSON, and the reason is JSON is the Java data format of the web, and so it is really just a numbers game. You know, it's the fact that lots of developers use JSON is the reason to use JSON. Technology is always fashionable, and it will always be fashionable, and you have to consider the developer base when you're making these decisions. And that was really a sign to me that maybe the people coming up with this new standard were basing it upon their existing solutions. So my conclusion was there was an element of reinvention of the wheel. If you again understood outside the industry, understand how data works, and using data on a day-to-day basis, you would have been able to copy some of the designs of other technologies, and actually maybe even just use other technologies. So what I forecast by my peer review was we would have a few gotchas along the way where we are reinventing the problems of the past. I.e., reinventing the wheel means recreating the problems of the past. So real world gotchas that we've seen is there's no message length. Now, coming to the fourth point, actually, which is the standard is being consumed by PLCs. It's always polite to tell the machine you're talking to, the device you're talking to, getting away from the world of our industry, but just any device, that the message you're about to send is of this certain length. And that allows that device to allocate memory to that message that's coming in. Now, that concept has probably been lost, because if you work on a PC architecture, we have lots of memory, and we have lots of processor. This standard is being consumed by PLCs, and so I'm sure it would have been nice for the PLCs to understand, and the smaller devices to understand what sort of message length you're sending. That hasn't caused us a problem, but that's just an architectural trait that you see in other networking technologies. The next one is there's no end of message character, and the actual end of message is the XML tag, the closing tag of the Hermes. So if you see here, this is the closing, which is fine when the messages are not being sent that often. And again, we have now a PC architecture kind of mindset, which we just read the buffer of the network socket, and when it's empty, we then process the message. But when messages are coming in quite fast, we have seen message concatenation. And I think a simple end of message control character would have said that's the end of the message. And control characters are characters that you don't actually see as humans. They are not described as a letter or an ASCII character or Unicode character. They are hidden. So a null character is a good example of a end of message. The other, it comes back to the scope. It comes back to everything about the Hermes Standard, which is a lot of our members are trying to consume the Hermes Standard using PLCs. Not the architecture I would have chosen. I think when you're using data-centric technologies, you need a PC-like device to consume that message. And then your PLCs can then do the things that PLCs are designed to do, which is timing critical, safety critical situations. And so they can do the simple read sensors, move motors kind of stuff. I can't do anything about that, and that's the constraint of the standard because of the members have decided to go down that route. We predict that when they realise how constrained how much of a constraint they're applying on themselves, they will essentially come up with the architecture that we've done with our adapters, which is to have a PC that does the messaging and that then interacts with the actual board handling equipment, for example, of the PLCs. But it does mean that the messages and the standard itself has been very much constrained. We've had very artificial and not really tested limits on the message size. And I'll come on to that in a little bit. So where are we today? As I said, 1.7 is just about to be released. It hasn't been, and I have no information of why it hasn't been, which raises a little bit of a red flag of the communication and the feedback to the membership. But at 1.7, what we have done is replace SMEMA. So we've ticked that box, and actually we probably did that many versions ago. So there's no great change in the normal the basic handshake between board ready and machine ready, which is the equivalent of the SMEMA signals between 1.1 and 1.7, which is today. Having said that, I've seen a lot of equipment that is still on 1.1. They tick the box, they said to their customer base they support Hermes, and they've forgotten about it. And they might not have an upgrade path. And again, how do you upgrade PLCs? Can you easily upgrade something that is very much has a hardware constraint? But if we just look at the standards, the different the differences in the different numbers, really, work order ID was added in 1.2, batch order ID was 1.3, and 1.4 introduce subboards and action and route. So there's not a great deal of change. So it's something that we've done a little bit, which is we've upgraded as our customers have requested it. But I would definitely recommend the whole community out there, if you are already supporting the Hermes Standard, to try to get to 1.4 at least. And you can still support the version, but downgrade the functionality of the other features that you might not want to implement today. Of course, all versions are backward compatible, but as what we found is if we are dealing with a version of 1.1, then the data will be lost. Work order ID will be lost, batch order ID will be lost between the machines. So some of our customers are actually using our adapters on machines that are technically Hermes compatible, but they're waiting for suppliers to upgrade. Other enhancements have been, there's a vertical channel, and that was for tracking boards as they've moved between the machines, but going upwards to MES systems. I think I'm going to come on to the governance in a minute and getting people involved and that transparency key and that collaboration key. This is the point where the MES companies should have been invited in, and they should be developing solutions to support the vertical channel. What we've seen is customers creating their own solutions. And we've also considered creating our own solution because we haven't got the visibility of what the MES companies are providing. And again, that was a great marketing opportunity to say that we support Hermes and this is our functionality, and it's a great opportunity for me to recommend to my customers the MES companies that are supporting it. But I've contacted them very briefly just by email and I don't get much response. And this is the common theme of this video, really, which is the communication, the transparency of it all is showing how constrained our industry is. Final enhancement is we have a command so we can stop beyond the next machine. So I think the main use case is for ovens. So if a buffer is full after the oven, we can then tell the Hermes Standard can tell the line to stop moving, to stop supplying the oven with any more boards. The next is the rollout. This is unique. This is unique in our industry because this is a standard, a data standard, that is being controlled by equipment suppliers. And so unlike normally where a customer gets involved and the customer becomes the glue of getting things done and everything's late and innovation is poor or innovation is only based upon the customer you have, this is unique because this is being controlled by the equipment suppliers. So they own the scope of the standard, implementation timeline, promotion to the industry, marketing to the end user. The end user doesn't have control of this for the first time, which might be a reason for the current confusion or current silence of where we are. However, of course, I make a product that is solely based upon the Hermes Standard, so I'm not going to be, while I'm critical, I also see the success of it. So we're rolling out in so far 25 countries using our Hermes, SMEMA Hermes adapter. And what it gives us is a great view of the industry because we are based upon, we are interacting with SMEMA, and all machines have SMEMA. And it doesn't matter what equipment you're using. It doesn't matter your relationships between suppliers. We're getting a lot of knowledge of the industry, so we're well placed. And our customers are simply our end customers, they're the actual users. So they're not worrying about relationships or partnerships, they're simply buying from us and using us and feeding any improvements back to us if we can help them. From a kind of numbers point of view, I think Asia is the volume market. Naturally, lots of manufacturing happens over there. I think mainland Europe is using an incremental kind of step-by-step approach, which I completely approve of. It makes things less stressful. You roll out for one production line, then another production line, then another production line. Then you have word of mouth between certain factories of your own company. And so we're seeing that step-by-step approach of Hermes within Europe. I think the UK and US are inactive. We have a small set of customers in both. However, looking at that, first of all, that's a good summary of the manufacturing industry, the electronic manufacturing industry in the world anyway. Secondly, Hermes Standard is kind of what we should have had many years ago. It is very appropriate for what the Americans would call the mum and pop kind of outfits. The 1 to 3 production line, the company of a single factory with a staff of maybe 50 or 100. This is getting people used to that movement of data from machine to machine. My point is that I think a lot of larger customers have probably already got MES solutions that are moving products, moving data between machines and storing that data. And so their probably drive is not there to upgrade to Hermes until it's just a given. And that's kind of where we need to be. It needs to be a free interface that you get on the machine and suddenly you've got this enhanced functionality. And really, I mean, speaking as a British citizen for the UK, there's lots of those small outfits, those small to medium sized businesses around where I live, and where we operate from, that could benefit from the Hermes Standard. But it's that marketing drive, and we have to market not only to the end customers but also to the other equipment manufacturers. And there's one key manufacturer that has recently announced that they're supporting it, but you can tell that they don't really know the benefits of it themselves, and so they haven't marketed it to their end users. And I think that's where just focusing on the UK, that's where we need to focus our efforts on too, which is double marketing to the equipment suppliers, then marketing to the end users. I think generally, we have a lacking of marketing of the benefits of the Hermes Standard. Lots of marketing, especially from companies such as ASMPT, of what the Hermes Standard is and what it potentially can give us. But I think the next step is to demonstrate, actually, this is a printer, this is a pick and place machine, this is an oven. This is what will happen when certain parameters aren't met, or this is what happens when data moves from machine to machine. So I've kind of hinted on the next point, which is the governance of the standard along the way. Now, it started off before I joined, so I don't really know the backgrounds or the history. It was an equipment supplier only, so they invited only the equipment suppliers to get inside the membership, which is understandable, because you want to, first of all, it's like herding cats. You kind of want a core group of suppliers that are going to support it, and you want to have some focus. So I understand why they did that. having said that, going back to the transparency goal that I had at the start, or I was watching, I think they could have published their meetings online. They could have had 6 monthly presentations online. Lots of stuff could have been online. You do get a good impression of you get the documentation, you get the test harness on the website, you get Q&As which are not up to date. You get a members list that you can't contact, or there's no link to their website that says about their Hermes effort. But that was a good start anyway. So the structure of it was, there was a chairman. I believe they change every 2 or 4 years, I can't remember. In my time there's been 3 chairmen. I think there might have been one before I joined, I'm not sure. There's then working groups that take your proposals, and then essentially they were as needed. So you would volunteer yourself, and you can go off and speak, discuss about the implementation of something at another meeting. There was a forum, which is a good start of trying to create that kind of communication point, but it was only for proposals, to actually just put up there and say, this is the documentation, this is the proposal. Whenever I've used it to try to ask questions, they go unanswered. And I would say actually that this is not just a criticism of Hermes. I've been watching the CFX GitHub pages, and quite often you get people that have questions, and of course there's no one officially to answer those questions, in my view, in my interpretation of what's happening, and so they just get left there. And it's quite a bad look of people having simple questions and no one able to field the answers. And of course that comes into the question of payment, doesn't it? You know, if people are going to put up their time to support others, who's going to pay for it? And of course the CFX and the Hermes Standard are both being pushed out there as free standards, which they are as an end user and as a user or as a developer. But obviously I can't be too critical, because everything of both the Hermes and the CFX is completely volunteer based, which is great. But I think what we need is that more of a communication, because more communication means more people know what they can contribute. And so the working groups, for example, because we're not an equipment supplier, we have tried to be a passenger. We have tried to be observer. We don't want to be pushing back at anything. It is the standard for the equipment suppliers only. And so I haven't been participating in the working groups, but I think there's a feeling within the membership, when I've come up with my concerns, that maybe I should be part of the working group. Well, I don't want to be part of the implementation because it's not my standard. I just implement it. And also have to relay that any questions that my customers have, or back to them, or field questions. I'm kind of become the unofficial kind of go-to, because the Hermes adapter is so well known within the industry. If you type in Hermes Standard, you get our adapter on your results page. So people have naturally come to us first. At the start, all the meetings were in-person meetings at trade shows. Because of the pandemic, we moved to online, and I think a lot of, especially software developers, we're not in it for the jolly. We like to have a discussion, we like to have communication, we like to have the conversation at trade shows, but at the end of the day, we need to get the job done. And so if we can get it done in an online sense, then that's what we need to be doing. And in this net zero era we now live in, we shouldn't be putting people on planes. And that's certainly my history of working within the industry directly. When I worked for the machine builder, you know, there was lots of people going on planes, and it was just Simple stuff. Anyway, that might be seen as criticism, but really that's just things evolving. At the start, there was a group of suppliers that got together, came up with this simple governance, and that worked fine. Over time, we needed to bring in other people. We needed to bring in the MES, Manufacturing Execution System, software people, companies. But we still had that door shut on them. And so, even it would be useful to ask simple questions to them, like, are you supporting the Hermes Standard? Would be a simple question. And there's been a lack of that kind of research and surveying from the membership. So at this point, we should know we should know the reason I'm creating this video, which is, where are we? How's it being rolled out? What suppliers are supporting it really? What challenges are they finding? The meetings originally at the membership were more of a show and tell, more of a discussion. But at the moment, or in the recent years, they become voting exercises. So you might have an agenda, and you read the agenda and you see the solution they've come up with. You turn up to the meeting. Now, at that point, if you see something you don't like, do you push back? Do you vote against? So at the end of the meetings, we had the vote. And it always felt very awkward. If someone's gone off, if a working group has gone off and come up with an implementation for something, and you have a concern at that meeting, not at the working group meeting, but the voting meeting, essentially the meetings that we have as every 6 months, it feels very awkward to vote against something. So there was a tendency to polite vote, because we were being forced to vote. Anyway, knowing all these issues, there was always this desire to bring in the everyone else, essentially, software companies. So we finally got agreement to start an IPC task group. Now, of course, it has an IPC name, but it wasn't managed by the IPC. And yet the IPC is day in, day out. That's what they do, standards. They understand the politics of everything, and they know how to make sure things are fair and people get a fair vote. And more importantly, and what we haven't had, is traceability, accountability. No, when people vote, there's no record of who's voted, or if they voted against, why have they voted against? If they abstained, why have they abstained? To me, if I have a group of people that are voting against or abstaining in voting, that would be a red flag for me. I would have to go and question whether we've given them the right to reply, and whether they've have the ability to record their feedback. And ultimately, we want to get to a point where they're voting for, because we've listened to them and we've improved something. So the IPC task group was created, I think, around 2023. We had a number of votes. We had a number of, let's get this done. We're happy with this. This would, though, be open to everyone. We would get the IPC Works tool, which would give us a collaboration point. We would be able to message people. We would be able to upload documents. We'd be able to inform people about progress. But this new task group that was created doesn't have any of the members of the Hermes Standard. This has what I can see is the CFX group of members, and their meetings occur after the Hermes Standard meetings. So you have all this knowledge share in the Hermes Standard meetings in theory, though as I've just described, it's normally a bit too late. And then I presume they're asked to vote. I've never been part of their meetings or their voting sessions, because their meetings are still in person. which again, net zero, we should not be having in-person meetings with net zero with stuff like this. But again, that goes back to the way that IPC works, and maybe they need to modernise. What the IPC does do well is, from what I observe, again, I'm not really participating too much, is they log what people's concerns are and they make it completely visible to everyone. And their voting is online. So by the fact that you're not pressurising people to vote in a certain way, you're, as a membership, as a chairman, you're able to decide whether you've actually supplied people with enough information. By making it digital, by making the process completely digital and completely milestone based, you're making sure that everyone is completely informed. And I think by having an online vote, you're taking that, you're being confident, or taking that chance in a negative sense, but you're being confident that you've supplied everyone with enough information, they've had the discussions, they've had the compromises, things are being worked on, and now we go to the vote, and we can be completely certain that people will vote for this change. And I think in the current way of the way we do it, we come to the meetings, we learn about the proposals, we learn about the implementations. Sometimes people pipe up. Depends who's in the meeting. Of course, if your time zone isn't aligned, you don't get to attend that meeting, and more importantly, you don't get to vote. And I'm talking about the Hermes Standard meetings here. So I think there's elements of both that I like. We need to be online for general discussions. Whether that's general discussions or implementations, they could be separate meetings. I like the Works tool because it gives me a point. I can see who's actually in this group and I can message people directly. I like the online vote because it's the last thing you do, making sure that everyone's kept up to speed and everyone has their voice. The kind of audit or traceability of what's occurred is something that we're currently lacking from the Hermes Standard, where we don't know what comments people have made. It's not noted down. It's the agenda. The minutes of the meeting doesn't detail what people have said. And I don't expect that to be in complete detail, but if someone's had an objection or people have abstained from voting, I think that's a good way of highlighting that there might be concerns. But what I don't like about this is the fact that we've got two groups now. That's the major point. That's the major, wow, how did that happen? Now, I don't know why I didn't. I think I piped up at one point. The major reason is, again, this is reading between the lines because it's not noted anywhere, is some of the suppliers don't want to be in the IPC group because it essentially is an open shop, and potentially you could have customers within that group. And so what they've tried to do is try to compromise by having two groups, which in my view, it just adds to the communication nightmare. So what I wanted to happen is we just declare that we've met a milestone, we move everyone over to IPC Works, and we continue as is, and we welcome anyone new into the membership. That's what I thought would happen, but actually what we've got now is one meeting that happens before another, and I don't know the visibility of the IPC task group at the moment. I can imagine if I was on that, I would be going, what's this about? I have no idea what they're talking about. On the whole, because the standard's been so basic and simple, we've had no real controversial improvements. So that's why I think it's worked, but it's not worked because it's been well managed. The question is, have we met the scope? Which is the question of like, kind of, are we done on this part of whatever we were trying to do? And as I said before, the scope was actually actually open-ended until 1.5, until I actually made the point, which is we have a scope which has ... at the end of it, which means it's open-ended. And we're dealing with engineers here. We're dealing with engineers that should know that we have a scope, we work to the scope, and more importantly, we ask the question, is something out of scope? But it was open-ended to 1.5. I think the reason is because, at 1.1, people were still questioning what the Hermes Standard could be. But that's it. I think at some point, we needed to close it and say, ultimately, in my mind, again, going back to the governance, it was a question of, if everyone disappeared tomorrow and another group of people came along, would they understand that there are constraints in place? Would they understand of what they could be breaking if they suddenly came at this with loads of new ideas? And that's what the scope should be. It's an engineering tool. It should guide us to where we go. Today, it's still very vague, but again, as I described at the beginning, realistically, we were trying to move boards between machines. We're trying to replace SMEMA. We're trying to add some data to that. So really, that's the scope. And we have this major constraint that this standard is being consumed by PLCs. So frustratingly, from many people, we keep getting requests about adding attributes. And you can tell there's a fear now of adding anything more, because it's already potentially the versions numbers are going up for every single meeting, and I think we've got to a point now where we have to say no more, which is weird because this is a data standard, and the concept of saying something's done is very much a hardware thing to do. This is our product and this is it done. Of course, in the world of software, we can always add things, but we need to take the whole industry along with us. And so how to do that, I think that should have been considered right at the start, which is to say, this is the scope, we're now out of scope. This might be scope version 2. So, because the scope was so, this bit here might not make sense, but from someone that was not an equipment supplier, whenever I voted, I had to say, is this within the scope? And because the scope was so vague, it was hard for me to say, actually, I'm going to vote against this because it's out of scope. So I often voted abstain. And actually, abstain was something that I brought in again, because I said, we're voting for and against. I don't want to vote against. I want to show the chairperson that either I'm not interested in this, or I haven't got enough knowledge about this, or I have some sort of concern. So I often voted abstain to show that. But it didn't really support that. And I'll give you an example of this. So subboards is a great example of something that was out of scope. And the reason it was out of scope, in my view, but actually it was within scope, is because this standard is being consumed by resource-constrained PLCs. Subboards, there is an endless number of subboards, and they can have an endless amount of data. And yet, if you look in the document, there's no constraint on that. And that was a point where I think I probably voted abstain, because I saw that going in. I thought, hang on, one moment you're telling us that we have a constraint, but because it wasn't in the scope, I wasn't able to say that was my reason for voting against. And so it went in. But at the moment, it's untested. We don't know if that breaks anything. We don't know how many subboards can break a PLC. We don't know whether PLCs are currently supporting subboards. So that's a good example where the scope wasn't defined. I appreciate it wasn't going to be defined right at the start, but it needed to be lopped off. And I did that, and they pushed it back to me and said, okay, you want this scope constraint, what do you think of it? And I was like, well, it's not really my decision, and it's a bit too late, but yeah, it looks good. Basically they just took off the ... really, but it's still very vague. But really, we are where we are with all this stuff, really. So the scope is, in my view, the scope is what it is today. No more. Any larger data sets should use the CFX, and we've had something that went in at 1.7, which I looked at and thought CFX, and that's something that, again, the marketing of the CFX and Hermes said they work together, but I haven't seen anything that says this is when you should use Hermes Standard and this is when you should use the CFX. So, for example, inspection systems should relay back data back to the printer or whatever via the CFX. But I think there was something that went in at 1.7 which tries to use the supervisory channel. Supervisory channel is for the monitoring of the line and a bit of safeguarding, storing that data, make sure that the data isn't lost. It's not to be used for other means, and yet 1.7 kind of introduced that concept. Question was, why aren't we using the CFX? Probably because the manufacturer isn't supporting the CFX at the moment. So that's a problem, their problem, not our problem. The other question is, how do we test it? Well, there's no test system to test this new 1.7 feature. So at 1.7, I was getting, this is the reason, one of the reasons of this video, because I was kind of getting to the point where we need to reboot the governance of the standard. We need to make sure that this is 1.1 or whatever. So the question is, can we cut the cake? Can we celebrate a milestone? We haven't in 8 years celebrating the milestone. And this cutting the cake term came from previous Chairman Thomas, who at the end of one of the meetings said, we can do and go to the trade show and we can cut the cake. And I thought, oh great, we're nearly there, we're nearly done. But he was chairman 2 chairmans ago. So that just shows you how long ago we've been talking about this and how this has been dragging out a little bit. And the more it drags out, the more meetings we have every 6 months, the more energy gets zapped, the more we forget about getting back on the road again. So next step. So hopefully the governance will be sorted itself out over time. What do we need? We need more marketing of what is the benefits of using the Hermes Standard. Again, really, it's not the tier 1 customers, it's the lower end customers. It's getting them on board. Buy this piece of equipment, you will get this functionality for free. As I said before, ASMPT has done a great job in marketing the Hermes concept. But what they haven't done is gone to the next step of saying this is what the printer will do when the Hermes Standard, using the Hermes Standard, or what the oven will do, or whatever. This is the changeover process of a product. This is what happens when the product isn't aligned and the traceability alarm gets raised. Things like that, a little bit more marketing to the end customer rather than kind of that midway customer of the equipment supplier versus kind of what they can do. And then we can consider, right, after the reboot, if we're going to have a reboot, or if we're going to have a governance change, what would be the next steps? I think a lot of people would say no more next steps, but we have to consider, resolving the issues, or resolving the constraints we already have. The PLCs using the Hermes Standard, can we have a little device that sits alongside the PLCs? Can equipment suppliers, board handling equipment suppliers, use our solution? We have the software. You can take the software. If it improves the rollout of the Hermes Standard, then it's a great achievement for the industry. Stop reinventing the wheel. Stop doing your own solutions. Can we add security? Now again, that's a PLC constraint. If we were using PC architecture, we can just add a security layer on top of below the Hermes standard. The days of believing that if you're inside the company firewall then you are safe are over. They've been over for many years. We now have to have device-to-device security. The Hermes standard does not provide device-to-device security. The blocker, once again, is the PLCs. We need that solution. If we can get over that PLC constraint, then we could potentially use the CFX as the Hermes standard. The Hermes standard is a data set at the end of the day. It's not, we don't need to worry about too much about the underlying network sockets. There is a level of handshaking to say I'm ready and let's go. But really, we could be using the CFX. The CFX hasn't been used previously because it's seen as a star-based, potentially slower star-based configuration. But the CFX does allow point-to-point communication, and then it has a security. So if we can get a solution for the PLCs, then I think the PLC manufacturers, well not the manufacturers, the board handling equipment that are using the PLCs would be very grateful, because they are currently having to implement software that normally they simply just start and stop conveyors. You know, they don't have the resource or the knowledge that is needed, and they're saying they're supporting it, but they're not really supporting it when you dig into the detail. Things like simple setup, so network discovery. So at the moment we have to implement, we have to insert IP addresses and port numbers. That's a very confusing setup process. I think most people understand basic networks, but we still see static IP addresses being used, things like that. We see a lack of DHCP servers being used. We see a lack of routers being used. So if we can make the setup simple using protocols such as Simple Service Discovery Protocol, SFTP, we use this on our adapters. It means that we can customers can discover the devices on the network without having to worry about IP addresses. If we can do that kind of stuff, that would be great. That doesn't have to be actually part of the Hermes standard. That can be a bolt-on. Again, there's a PLC limitation there. But what we ultimately need to do with the marketing drive is have a bit of a user community. We need people to be collaborating and talking about what they're getting up to. I guess the obvious point would be to get some Hermes users and Hermes developers and suppliers into the same room together, and maybe talk about it on a podcast or something like that, or a video podcast would be great. But we lack that user group, and I appreciate that standards are impartial. They are, no one talks, frustratingly in my sense, no one talks about solutions because no one wants to accidentally promote their products. But that's what we lack. I mean, if we don't do that, we means lots of people reinvent the wheel. We are a small industry. We are a siloed industry, and we should be collaborating more. If you want to read more, there's a blog I've written. It's there on the screen. About a bit more detail about what I've said today, though I have pretty much talked about it a lot. If you don't know much about our product, we create the Hermes, the SMEMA Hermes Adaptor. It's reasonably priced. It upgrades your SMEMA-based equipment, but also a lot of customers are using it to inject and extract data along the line. So not just upgrading equipment, but budding it up with points of the line where you might want to inject a barcode or double check for interlocking so products don't continue down the line, or changing beacons, tower beacons, LED beacons, things like that. Basically, it's all based upon an event-driven architecture. So when something happens, you get an event, and then you can subscribe that event to the serial port, networking, anything you want really. And it's based. The user interface is a web browser, which again it makes it remotable, and it's the reason we actually came in this industry in the first place, which is to encourage the industry to move towards the web browser. We can then use web technologies on the edge, on the on-premise, on the intranet, within your factory. But that's a nice stepping stone towards interacting with other systems. So there's a website there below me if you want to find out about our adapter. So I hope that brings you up to speed with what we know. It doesn't answer all the questions. I certainly will be sharing this with the membership, and I'm sure they'll learn about it. But this is what we know. I think just it needs a bit of a marketing reboot, making sure the website is up to date, and making sure that collaboration factor is in play. Or we could cut the cake and say we're done. I don't know. It depends on whether people want to continue with the efforts, or whether we say that actually that platform, that Hermes Standard platform, is now done, and now we can build upon other solutions. I don't know, but we will see. So I hope that helps. Thank you for watching.